It's time for another episode of The Sean Tabbitt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Errol Doebler, and we're going to be discussing his new book, The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, How Leaders Inspire Confidence and Clarity in Combat in the Boardroom and at the Kitchen Table. Errol, it is so fun to be talking to you again, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I have finally hit the big time.
Woohoo! I can't promise all of your future fame and fortune will be because of this interview, but hopefully I will contribute to some of the success. Now, you and I had an opportunity to sit down, I think it was last month, and just get to know each other, talk about your background in the book. But I know for the majority of my audience, this is going to be the very first time they are meeting you. So let's kick this off by having you share a bit of the Errol Doebler origin story. So for everybody meeting you for the first time today, what are a few things they absolutely need to know about you?
Well, when you're from New York, it feels like you always have to say, I'm from New York. It's something that it's just inherent in New Yorkers. So I am born and raised in Bayshore, Long Island. I'm currently in Jersey now, but I've traveled all over the place, but this is kind of where I settled in. For what your audience needs to know about me, there's a lot. My resume is something that catches everybody's eye. So I was a Navy SEAL officer. I was an FBI special agent, and I currently run now my own leadership consulting firm, Leader193, where I use a culmination of those experiences to help leaders of all levels. But my story is, I think, truly just somebody who at every stage of their life was consumed and passionate about leadership. And now I want to share that message with as many people as I can in any walk of life. So I am, if somebody cares about leadership, I want to talk to them. And that's kind of my backstory. But I think we're going to get to learn a whole bunch more about me as we go forward. But those are the highlights, I guess.
Well, in terms of the name of your organization, like Leader193, what's the significance of that?
So 193 is my Navy SEAL training Hell Week class. So as a Navy SEAL, the training is generally regarded as one of the more difficult trainings in the world. It's 26 weeks long. But Hell Week, which if anybody knows anything about it, you've seen it on Discovery Channel. It's what everybody focuses on. That's very early in the process. It's about like week 4 or 5, if I remember correctly. And I was with class 193. We started that class with 200 people or so. And we ended our Hell Week after the 4th or 5th week with 10. And it was just a very unique experience, probably more unique than most. It's a 70% attrition rate throughout the whole Navy SEAL training. And this was, whatever that percentage is, that's what really keeps it at the 70%. So I just kind of named it homage to my Hell Week class. So much of the good that I learned from leadership and the consequences of bad leadership really came from the SEAL team. So I just kind of wanted to stay connected to that background. So that's where the 193 comes from.
And I've had a number of Navy SEALs on the show before talking about leadership books, but you're the first author I've encountered who had a mix of SEAL experience and also FBI experience. So I'd love for you to share, maybe like for you, what were some of the key leadership or shaping leadership experiences that you got in those two different environments?
Yeah, in the SEAL teams, the expectation of great leadership was the norm. It was the requirement. And if you were a bad leader or you experienced bad leadership, it stood out. Like, wow, what happened here? And that's a great place to be. It's a very high performance environment with those standards for leaders at all levels, not just officers, but everybody was expected to do their share in leadership. The difference is, and this is not to take gratuitous shots at the FBI, because some of the best leaders I've ever met were in the FBI. However, the expectation of great leadership was not the norm in the FBI. Unfortunately, it was the opposite. If you got a good leader, you were moved to a squad and there was a great leader, you were just like, thank goodness, finally, we can get some work done. And that's a sad commentary, and it ultimately became one of the reasons why I left the FBI, because it was frustrating, and so that's the inherent difference. But again, I always want to put in that caveat: some of the greatest leaders I've ever met were in the FBI. It just wasn't the expectation.
Next, I'd love to have you maybe flesh out a little bit the part of your journey. So you transitioned from the SEALs to the FBI, and then you go from the FBI into leadership consulting. Like, what's the road that gets you from kind of that point B to point C?
So again, when I was frustrated in the FBI, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was 13 years in, and I have a wife and 3 small children, and I was in the private sector in between the SEAL teams and the FBI. I left the SEAL teams because I got injured, and so I spent 4 years or so in the private sector. And I said, well, I'm not going back to sales. I'm not going to be beating the street as a salesman at this point. I'm just not doing that. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I have a real hard time staying with where I am. So my brother-in-law owns a company. He's very successful, and he's just kind of staring at me. And I said, what? He goes, Errol, I hire a guy that doesn't have half your credentials, a boatload of money, just to get him on the phone once a month and get his thoughts on leadership. And I said, that exists? I had no idea this world even existed. I said, you're telling me that I could just talk about leadership to people and they'll hire me? He said, yes. And that was it. It's like a whole new part of my brain and world and gear started turning. And that day, that's when the reflection started, right? You had to really put pen to paper. What do I believe? And can I translate this to people in a very clear manner? And who is it applicable to? And then it was just a matter of saying, okay, yes, it can be done. I do have a message. I think it's clear. I think it will resonate. Now do I have the guts to do it? And I did. And that's it. It was a conversation. Thank God he was there that day, because I don't know what, I'd probably still be thinking about it. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then just, be mad at myself and then miserable, which a lot of us find ourselves in that trap. But so that's the transition, a lucky conversation, right? I was, that was it.
Well, I find some of the coolest things that happen often show up in the weirdest places. It's on an airplane, in a car ride, in a green room, somewhere behind the scenes. Often those brilliant moments, they're not when we're trying to make them happen. It's seemingly random, yet those are the things that often will shift our life for the better. In terms of the organizations you've had the pleasure of working with, like give us a sense of your range of clients. Is it only Fortune 500 huge companies, or is it a wide range of folks that you've had the pleasure of serving?
It's been a wide range of folks, and it's funny because as you start this thing, people tell you what's your target market, right? You have to have a target market, and your target market can't be everybody. And that's what I think probably most people start, right? Who's this book for? This book is for everybody. What's your target market? Everybody. And so I did. Look, I had to say, okay, here's where we're going. And it's pretty standard stuff, right? You've got to, as terrible as it sounds, but it's the reality. You have to go to people who have the money to spend so you can make a living, right? And that's generally your mid-sized companies and above. That being said, I have had the privilege of working with startups, right? The one tech person who's starting their own tech company and says, I saw where I was a poor leader in this big company I worked with when I ran teams. I can't do that now because now it's mine. Right? That's a beautiful place to start. I've had some real high profile stuff. I work with the NBA referees. I work with their union leadership. And that's really, really niche because they are professional referees by trade. And now they're doing this leadership for their union, and they battle against that big NBA behemoth. And inside the big companies I work for, like the IBMs, like the Comcast, I've worked with the higher level leaders, but I've also had the privilege of working with the lower level people there, because when you get somebody with a vision in a big company that says, or a mid-sized company that says, okay, we need to be ready for our next set of leaders. So we want to have our bench ready. So here are a bunch of 20-somethings who've been with the company 1 or 2 years. Errol, will your process work for them? And the answer is 100% yes. And so it's been a real wide variety of companies. And it's ultimately anybody who cares about leadership, they'll get something out of it. But that's where I am now.
Well, and it's stories like this that encourage me as somebody who spent, gosh, I think close to a decade of my life as a middle manager. It's sometimes those like people who are starting out or people who are kind of midway on the ladder that desperately need the most help, because that is where like the nuts and bolts things that make your company successful, that's where it's all happening. So if people need training, it is people at those
100%.
two levels for sure.
100%. And that's where to get them, right? Because you want to make sure that they're progressing as leaders. The big problem that people have is when they get to that COO level, they're still leading like they're down here at the bottom, without delegating and doing all those things. So it's imperative to get those lower levels and mid levels folks correct.
Well, if people head over to your website at leader193.com, just throw that out there, leader193.com, go check it out. One of the things that they're going to see front and center is that you're not really about training, you're about empowerment. And I feel like that's an important distinction. Why is that a notable difference?
Because there is obviously a distinct difference between training and empowerment. I have a process, and a process, if you follow a process, that will empower you to use it in any aspect of your life. Okay. And that's the difference. Now, again, now that I am a published author, I can say, who is this book for? This book is for anybody who cares about leadership. Okay. This is for the stay-at-home mom or dad. This is for the CEO of the Fortune 100 company. This is for anybody. Okay, because it's process, and it empowers you to make the right decisions in your particular environment. Okay, what's the art? Inside each one of the elements of the process, I'll say, look, we can all agree that these elements are important. We should all look at them and follow them. But inside each one of those elements, there's going to be something different and unique as it relates to you. And that now allows you to make that process your process. Okay, and that's empowering. Okay, I don't say, I had somebody, you get resistance sometimes from folks. And because some people are put into a leadership training against their will. And I always recommend against that, but then it's always a nice challenge. And I had somebody say to me one time, yes, well, Errol, this is your process. And I said, no, not anymore. It's not. I said, because your company hired me and they saw that they liked it and adopted it. Now it's your process. And that is empowering. Right? When you just let people know, now it's yours. I think that's the difference. So I hope that makes it clear, right? When you have a process you work on, that's empowering because you make that yours. It's applicable now to your certain circumstance, as if I'm training you on one thing that may or may not be applicable.
Well, the best process or framework is the one that you're actually going to put into process, that you're actually going to use. And I think, just to tag on to what you said, it's an opportunity to rewrite your story. I mean, we all operate within the stories we're telling ourselves in our own head. We're operating within the stories we're sharing with others about our lives and what we're doing. And if we can find that framework, either that really resonates with us or that we're really willing to take ownership and invest the time with, I always look at it like it's literally an opportunity to rewrite our story and change not only our present, but shift our future as well.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. And I think that part of it starts with the first part of the process, which is emotional awareness and recognition. And I purposely harp on that and lead with it. And it's a tough place to lead with because it makes people very uncomfortable. It's not something that they're used to doing. They're used to understanding those emotions and how they drive actions. And that's why I started to formalize my process. Because every time I would get on a call with somebody, they would provide me with the leadership challenge. And I would always just come back to the same thing. Just look, let's talk about how you're feeling about that, because that's driving certain actions. And then you've got to decide how you want to act. And then we need to make a plan. And then we need to understand why we might have this thing in place that's common sense, but resist it, right? So, but when we can make it our own like that, that's where it really does get powerful. And it starts with that first element, right? The emotions and where they drive us.
Well, in a moment, I want to do a quick exercise where we sort of take a fictitious company, if you will, through some of the different elements in your process. But One more question, kind of related to the story behind the book. Obviously in my day job, I work in the publishing industry and have been in publishing for about a decade now. And I'm always curious to hear from an author, like, why was this the right season for their book to come to life? And, I always feel like there's a percolating, there's a kind of a welling up inside you where you're ready for a message to come out. So for you, why was this the right season for the process, art, and science of leadership to hit the market?
Well, I think it kind of reverses itself. As somebody who has a message and wants to get it out, I was going to get it out as soon as I was ready. Okay, regardless of what was happening. However, I think that in today's environment, it resonates more importantly than ever, that the need for leadership and a leadership process for people to be able to follow, it couldn't be any more important than everything that's happening in our world today. And the reason why is because leadership should never change. Okay, so how we led pre-COVID, whatever political thing is happening, how we led then should not be different than how we're leading now. And when I tell that, when this whole thing started and I would talk to the people who I coached, they kind of look at me like, but shouldn't something change? And I said, no, the speed at which you need to make decisions may change, right? How you do the speed or the circumstances might be different, but your process will remain the same. So feel good about it. Trust that. Okay. And then they get to realize, wait a second, you're right. I still need to, emotions may be running higher, but I still need to understand my emotion before I act, right? I may need to make more plans or shift on a dime quicker on which plans I need to make because things are changing so fast, but it's still a planning process that I need to follow, right? Nothing should change. So I think today with emotions running high, with leadership in question at all aspects of our lives, for people to understand there is a process and it's okay that things feel like they're falling down around you. What do you go to in moments of stress? You go to what you know. And I say, know this process.
Well, Errol, if I go to leader193.com and I call the phone number, I fill out the contact form and we connect and I say, hey, I'm Sean and I run ABC Publishing. What's the process you're going to lead me if we decided to partner together? Take us into kind of like the 10,000, 100,000 foot overview of how I would walk through a process with you to maybe shift and change my leadership or the leadership in my organization. Well,
what I do is, and what I decided to do was make the initial parts regimented. And that bothers people, right? But like I said, I started doing that anyway, right? I started with Sean, what's on your mind? Well, no, you're hiring me to figure out what's on your mind. So let me just trust me for a second. Let me introduce you to my process, okay? I'm going to ask you to go through each element per week. Relay it to your life, what's happening, okay? We got our app. You're going to fill out the app. I get to track your engagement. So now I know when we talk on Friday and you've worked emotional awareness and recognition for the week, that specifically, we're going to focus our conversation on that and how it impacted your life. And then we move on to the next part of the process, right? Because each element builds on the one before. They're not separate and distinct principles that may or may not be related. So I ask people to trust me. Let me walk you through my process, and I promise you, we are going to get to your big leadership challenges. But until we understand how we operate as an individual and as a human being, which is the first couple elements of my process, until we start digging deep, getting aware of what we do based on how we feel, that challenge you're facing right now, you're just not going to get to it. And it's the hardest 2 weeks, okay? But that's okay, because then we start putting meat on the bone and making decisions, right? All this awareness, Sean, I got you on that, right? Now you feel awful about yourself. And I said, no, there's good news.
Help me.
That's right, because now we get to decide. We start deciding how we want to behave. And on it goes. So that would be the first part of the big picture. I would ask you, trust me on this process. Once we get through the 5 elements, then pick something, right? Now we get to say, what's the challenge? And 100% guaranteed the answer is going to be found inside this process. And it always is. And then we start really making headway. And the beauty of it is, it doesn't even matter where you thought your challenges were at work. Mostly it's at work because that's how people hire me. People are bringing this home. And that was what my dream was. Bring it home. Try it here, right? Because if you can do this where you have so much emotional skin in the game, okay? And really what most people are doing is abusing the area that's supposed to be the safe space instead of cultivating it. People start to bring it home. It's really exciting. So yeah, that's it. I think may have gotten off track because I get very passionate about the thing, but we start with something regimented, but then I ask you to trust me, and then it opens up your world into how to solve every single problem, regardless.
Well, in terms of the kind of the length of time in an average situation to kind of walk through the training, is it like a 6-week process, a 2-month process? Like in terms of time investment, like what does that look like on average?
So I ask at a minimum that you give me 8 weeks. Okay. And I have a video series that I did, so I don't have to lecture to you, right? We'll send you, for example, I'll send you out that week's video on Sunday. Please watch it. It'll give you everything you need to do. And then we'll talk one-on-one on Friday. So we'll get, so you'll get kind of the video series. You'll get the book now. And then you get the one-on-one calls where we hash it out. We get the app so you can type in your stuff. But at a minimum, I ask you to give me 8 weeks. More often than not, my clients will say, okay, what now? And then I say, all right, let's extend it to 6 months. Let's touch base twice a month. And everything we talk about will be based in this process. There's a leadership challenge. You can count on me because I don't give answers. I say, okay, well, where were you in the process? Did you skip a step in the process? Because that is probably the source of your problem. And usually it is. And that's all I do. We go back to the process. What I tell folks is I don't care what decisions you make, right? Outside of ethics and things like that, right? We get that, right? We're working on that. We're all generally ethical people and trying to make the right decisions. But I don't care what decision you make. I care about the process in which you make the decision. And that's where my challenges for you will be. Because for people to listen to me, they have to know that I'm not steering them in a direction that I think is important, right? Because then they can't trust my guidance. They have to know that I am about process and leadership. So how are you making that leadership decision? Good. Now that's your decision. Fantastic. I hope it works out, but be comfortable with the process you made was good. Because we can't always guarantee the right outcome. But we can guarantee that the process we use to make it is right. And when we have process, if that ultimate decision is wrong, we can go back and say, where in the process maybe did I miss it?
Well, and so you take people through a process. We kind of work out our own junk, and we start to make a plan for change and how we could move forward. I can see when it comes to rolling this out within an organization, people are used to the status quo, business as usual. This is the way we've always done stuff. And especially if you were the leader that encouraged things to always be done in that one way, if you come and say, hey, we're shifting it now, it's a new day, we're not going to be like before. Even for people who I think, probably complained and said they wanted change, when you all of a sudden try to thrust that change upon them, I'm guessing people come up against some resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Right. The final part of the leadership process, the resistance. Why is it when you are presented with something that makes so much sense, that is so logical? In this case, I would reference my leadership process, but in any aspect of your life, why is it that when it's something is just clear as day of what you should do, and you do the opposite? It's the resistance, right? That thing out there that just stops you from doing what you're doing. Here's why I have the science aspect of the leadership process, because there's a reason why people resist. There's a reason why there are certain behaviors that make sense, but we don't do them. When I was about 3/4 of the way done with my book, and I started to really dive into how the brain works, how it's wired, where does behavioral change come from, looking at neuroscience and things like that. And I started to realize, oh my goodness, my leadership process follows the exact journey that the brain makes when it starts to rewire itself. And I got really excited about that, right? Because now it no longer became just my opinion, which is fine. All I ever say is, folks, take this for a test drive. But if you don't believe this aspect of what I'm saying based on my experience, here's some science behind it, right? And that usually gets the people who are on the fence to say, okay, I will give it a try with an open mind. So the resistance, we roll something out. What's the science behind this? Well, every time we have an emotion, the brain literally sends a chemical to the body, right? So now we feel the way we think. That's science. We used to call it in the yogi hippie propaganda the mind-body connection. Well, it is the mind-body connection. We know that scientifically now, right? And so the people who always had that and knew that, now they're like, yes, I knew it was real, the science. The people who are a little leery of kind of that faith, like I feel something, there's an energy around it. When you say, okay, but here's the science, it's okay, trust it, right? That's allowed. So everybody kind of gets behind it. So we feel a certain way, and then we act a certain way. And then the mind and the body, through a chemical, we start to get addicted to that behavior based on an emotion. And I don't use the term addiction lightly, right? I've got experience in my family with addiction. It's real. But just like any addict, you will find any excuse in your environment to get what you need, right? And in some cases, it's a chemical addiction to a drug and alcohol. It's the exact same with your emotions. So let's just say you have become addicted to the emotion of anger or frustration or jealousy, right? You need to keep feeding that, and you'll find anything in your world to find it, right? To get that, to satisfy that addiction. So that's why change becomes so hard. But when we understand that it's really now how we've wired ourselves based on these emotions, we don't have to be so hard on ourselves anymore. And that's what I tell people who say, well, I don't know if we can do this. I say, look, here's why you think that. Because you are now addicted to what you've always done. Even though you know it's not working, it's familiar, and you just can't stop yourself. It's okay. We're going to start rewiring because science tells us we can, and it all starts with the awareness of an emotion, right? So we have these, between the science tells us we have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts per day, right? And 80% of the time, those thoughts are the same as the day before, which we can project forward, right? They'll be the same tomorrow and the next day, right? So that's how we become addicted to those things. So that's it. It's as simple as letting somebody know it's okay that you're resisting this. It's natural. It's different. It's not what you're used to. It's not how you've wired yourself. We're going to start rewiring it. And that's how we do it.
Well, assuming, whether somebody reads the book or they, partner with you for coaching and training, if they, take to heart the advice you give, the process you ask them to walk through, in your experience, probably in this case, more on the training side, because the book is brand new. As people look back, on the other side of the process and they've started implementing changes, like what are kind of the Eureka sort of aha moments they have when they look back, like maybe what surprises them? What have they discovered about their own ability to lead that they, just didn't even see or know how to do before? There has to be some crazy things that happen when people get to the far side of this.
Well, what it is that, oh my goodness, you were right. These elements of the process always present themselves. It just never goes away. And that's encouraging for me. And that is truly what they're surprised at. Errol, emotions. I just never knew how everybody was so emotionally charged and that drove their actions. And until I was aware of it myself, I couldn't make the right decisions based on what other people were doing. So for example, somebody does something, you're the boss, and somebody does something that's just crazy. They're acting out of character in some way and they mess up some project. When people go through my process, they don't look at it as a linear, you did this wrong, therefore now I need to get on you. They say, that behavior or that action, that part of this culture that I've not seen before, it's out of whack. But I know that emotions drive actions. So I'm going to ask Sean, hey, are you okay today? Is everything okay? I'm going to ignore the thing you did because that's just a result of an emotion that you were acting on. And you might say, you know what, Errol, no, everything's not okay. my dad just told me that he's been, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I can now, as a leader, forget what you did. I don't even care anymore because now I know why you did it. Now we can really deal with helping you out, right? So the fact that these elements of the leadership process do present themselves and the solution presents themselves all the time, that's the big aha again, right? A plan. Errol, nobody makes plans. I can't believe it. I can't believe nobody plans. Well, that's because you weren't aware of it. And now you know when you plan, especially if it's against somebody else, right? There's an adversary and you start making plans and then you quickly realize the other side's just winging it. And you were anticipating because you're following just a very methodical approach to a planning process and now you're winning. Simple as that.
And Errol, not to say the rest of your bio isn't unique. Obviously, you've done some pretty fascinating things. But one of the things that really stood out to me when David Amerland first connected us is that you are a Wim Hof method instructor. And so I would be doing a disservice if I didn't have you share about like, who is Wim Hof? What is he about? And how has that impacted and affected your life? I'd love to hear about how that's just been a part of your journey.
Yeah, it has been part of my journey. So I was introduced, first of all, Wim Hof is a Dutch extreme athlete. They call him extreme athlete because you don't know how else to describe him. He started doing things like climbing Mount Everest in a pair of shorts. Like that Mount Everest, he did that, right? He ran a marathon in the desert with no water. He submerged himself in a bucket of ice water for 2 hours without his core body temperature changing, right? He did all of these things. Now, his purpose to do this was very specific. It wasn't just to say, look at me, aren't I cool? He had gone through some challenges in his life. His wife had committed suicide. She was schizophrenic. And he just, how could I not help? Why was nobody able to help her? So he had a cause. And as he tells the story, one day he was from the Netherlands. He saw a body of water. It was a lake or a pond or whatever it was. In the middle of winter, he took his clothes off and jumped in. He can't even really explain why. But then he noticed what was happening to him. He said, whoa, wait a second. There's something to this. Cold, right? The clarity came to him. Long and short of it was he established the fact that we actually have control and can manipulate and influence our autonomic nervous system through breathing, cold exposure, and mindset. Not through drugs, right? Not through anything else, these things. And when we say our autonomic nervous system, we're specifically talking about our innate immune system. Okay, so that's Wim Hof and what he's about. And I got introduced to the method just through a corporate client. I was doing a weekend retreat for them, and the CEO called me and said, can you incorporate some Wim Hof? And I said, what is Wim Hof? So he just gave me the name, and the guy's name was Brandon Powell. And so I called Brandon, and we set it up logistically. And I said, Brandon, what is this thing? I did some looking, and there's somebody in an ice bath, and that immediately resonated with me, right? Because I was a SEAL, right? You're in the cold, you're in cold water. So I see somebody jumping into an ice bath. I go, whoa, what is this? So he explained it to me. He was gracious. We spent a couple hours on the phone. As soon as we got off the phone, I started the process to get certified because I was like, this is awesome. I'm not sure why I need this, but I feel like I need this. And then if you start practicing it, it will change your life. And I can talk to you for hours about it, but I won't. But then what I realized was, I said, my goodness, there's a leadership application to the Wim Hof method. So I was in it for myself initially, right? Like, this is great. And for all the reasons, right? Health-wise, emotionally wise. But then I started to say, well, for example, how do you practice leadership? Right? Leadership is hard to practice because generally you've got some principles or philosophies and then you just got to put them to the test and they either work or they don't. And you hope the consequences aren't too bad for you. So when we say, so my process, again, we start with emotional awareness and recognition. Well, here's something. How do you practice that? Well, here's one thing I can promise you. Before you step into an ice bath, you will have an emotion. When you step into the ice bath, you will have an emotion. And when you get out, you will have an emotion. So if you go into the ice bath with intention of, today I'm going to practice my emotional awareness and recognition, you're building a habit. And there's no way, you can't hide from the cold. That's why it's so amazing. Same thing with cultural awareness. What do? Trust me, before you step into an ice bath, you are going to do some things. You're going to walk around in circles. You're going to look around, find something to do to procrastinate. And what you're going to find is what you do before, during, and after an ice bath mirrors very closely to what you do in moments of stress, right? So it has become a great leadership tool. How do we lead under chaos? It's still part of the process. How do you experience chaos and practice leading under it without consequence? The ice bath, the cold. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I saw it, I became enamored by it. Then I started practicing it, and I said, I need this for my life, for my mental health, for everything. And then I saw the application. The other thing that it does in this time of COVID is everything I'm about to say is backed by science, right? Wim Hof doesn't do anything unless he's has a team of scientists with him right now. It has proven to strengthen your immune system. People die, and I have this figure somewhere and I need to pull them back out. But when people go to the hospital for a virus-related thing, something that's not like, you got hit by a car, they typically die because of overactive immune systems. Their immune system just isn't properly operating. It's overreacting. And when you do the breathing portion and the cold portion of the Wim Hof method, it is shown to strengthen that immune system. So you shouldn't get, when you get a virus, you shouldn't get like, deathly ill and all these things. That's an overactive immune system happening to you, right? You might not feel great. Your immune system's still going to work, but it's dampening the impact that it has on you. The white blood cells are still working, 100 miles an hour, but that inflammation response, that's the response that gets us sick. That dampens. So that's just one side note. If everybody's afraid of what's happening, COVID, oh my goodness, go do the Wim Hof method, strengthen your immune system. And if you're unfortunate enough to get hit with that virus, you're going to be okay. Right? I promise you will be okay.
Well, and if this talk about the Wim Hof method, if it's piqued your curiosity, I will be sure to include in the show notes a link to the related website. And Wim also has a new book that's coming out this fall. It's available to pre-order on Amazon. You can look that up, WIMHOF. You can find that out there wherever good books are sold. Errol, for the listeners, the viewers who want to connect with you, find out more about the book, find out more about the work you do, where can we connect with you on the web?
You write to my website, Leader193.com. That's the best place. I'm active on Instagram, at Leader193, Facebook at, Leader193. So anything Leader193, you start typing that into your various mediums, you'll find me.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Errol and pick up your own copy of the book as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Errol Doebler. Once again, our book today was The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, How Leaders Inspire Confidence and Clarity in Combat in the Boardroom and at the Kitchen Table. For more on Errol and the book, a great place to start is his website. Once again, you can find that at Leader193.com. And Errol, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you. The honor and pleasure is truly all mine, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet your audience.